Today we're going to cut some squares. So I have some examples of patchwork squares sewn together here. And oh, you can even see actually there's a little line around the square that shows where I stitched. So from the front, you can't see the lines, but from the back, you can see the seam where I've stitched. This is called the seam allowance, and you can see the square that I've drawn on the back of the fabric that shows the line where I will stitch, and that is the edge of the patchwork on the front. So today we're going to finish ripping our clothing so that we can cut it into squares. And in our stitch book, you see I have a little patchwork page of 4 squares. And this book is also made of squares. There's the front, the back of that front page, the patchwork section in the middle, the back of that patchwork section in the middle, which is cut from a shirt, and the back page, which I put my name on. So how many squares is that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and this one is made of 4 little ones. So we're going to need 6 squares that we're going to cut from jeans or old shirts. In order to cut, I think the first few things we need to talk about are the first tool we already used, the seam ripper. This is for cutting thread. So if I wanted to go into this old piece of shirt, this is a shirt from my stepmother who died, and I've been making something out of her clothes. I can get the seam ripper into a stitch. I make it go under. It's very tricky. That's why we got to use our eyes and our thumb and not be very safe. Don't put your finger in front of it. There, I got the seam ripper under there. Do you see that? It's a little bit blurry, isn't it? Is that better? I'm going to move it away a little bit. So I've got the seam ripper under that stitch, and then I push. And when I push, the little blade right there cuts the thread. And then I go 1, 2, maybe 2 stitches down, and I do it again. And now I've got a little piece of thread that's not connected to anything. And if I pull it up, well, maybe I cut it again. And I keep doing this until I've pulled my shirt apart. So one tool that we can use to cut is the seam ripper. That's for cutting seams. When you're done with your seam ripper, put the cap on so that you don't stab anybody. I also have 2 kinds of scissors at my house. These scissors are for anybody to use because they can cut paper. And one of the things I cut from paper is some patterns for making those little squares. So I'm just showing you an example here. I've used a ruler with inches on it to cut a 2.5 inch square. And a 2.5 inch square is the same one we'll be working with to make the squares, just like in our book. So I've cut a few squares here. This one already has the edge folded for the seam, so that's a useful illustration. And we also have prepackaged. Sometimes you can get little sampler packs of fabrics that are already cut into 2.5 inch squares. So we might use some of those to save ourselves some time with cutting. I also make 4 inch, 5 inch, and 6 inch squares. We're also going to use the 6 inch square because the 6 inch square is the cover of the book. So if I put the book over this, you'll notice it's the same size. So the book I made is a 6 inch square. And actually the ones in here that I made are not 2.5 inch. I think those are 3 inch. Yep, they're 2.5 inch before we sew. So this is important to notice. I showed you this one when it's all sewn together, and you see how there's a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Allowance means allowed to be there. You leave some extra room for the seam so that it doesn't come apart. But if I put my ruler on there, you'll see this is 1 inch, and if it's divided into quarters, there's 1, 2, 3, 4 quarters, and 1/4 inch is the seam. So what I did on my little square is I actually drew a line 1/4 inch in to show where I'm going to sew. That's going to happen for us with these too. We're going to draw on the back. And for my example, I might draw with a pen that is easy to see, but I'm going to draw the seam allowances. You can't see the seams in my finished book because they're hidden. But I can draw 1/4 inch. So I'm using my ruler on a 2.5 inch square to draw a line at 2 1/4 inch on one side. So I draw like this. And I draw like this. You might not like a red pen if you think it's going to show through, but I'm using a red pen because it's easier for you to see. There. And there. So I can draw the lines for where I'm going to sew. And when I do that, my 2.5 inch square actually becomes a 2 inch square. So they get a little smaller after you sew them. So that's why the smallest we're going to use today is 2.5 inch. I make these cardboard templates out of boxes. So this is a soda box. I make them for other things I sew too. I make them for, I got a heart here from a Cheerios box. I have a bird foot here. I have a circle. So I make shapes anytime I want to make the same shape over and over again. I use these templates. We're only going to work with squares today because squares are universal and easy, and they fit together beautifully when we get to the part where we actually make our patchwork. So I use these scissors for cutting the paper templates. And I don't use these scissors for cutting paper. I don't know if you can see this, but my stepfather wrote on these scissors. Let me get really close. Oh yeah, you can see it a little bit. It says, Chandra, sewing only. Cotton is a little bit tough to cut, so you want really sharp scissors. These scissors are sharp enough they could cut me. So you want to be careful to always keep them closed and put away when you're not using them. And now I'm going to cut my little square from a shirt that my stepmother used to wear. I'm making a memory quilt for her, and I'm going to use my cardboard square, my 2.5 inch square. I barely have enough room. I'm going to have a little bit of a seam here. But I draw around it, and then I'm going to use my scissors to cut it. But I'm also going to show you the final cutting tool. So I don't use the paper scissors. I use the sewing scissors. So I cut right along my line. And it's a little bit tricky at the end because I've got a little bit of a seam here. I'm going to cut this one. Cut along the line. I'm going a little bit outside of it, but you really want to cut right on the line if you can. So there I've got two edges. I'm going to show you my last tool. My last tool is a dangerous one. This is called a rotary cutter. I use it on this special mat. So you can see I have a mat down here that's made out of plastic. And when I open this blade, I move the safety cover back, and you see this is a blade, like a razor. Now this is very sharp. I don't want to get this anywhere near my fingers unless I close this. If I close it, there's a little piece of plastic protecting the blade. But if I open it, it is sharp all around, and it is really useful for cutting things flat. So if I put my square on top of the fabric I'm going to cut, I can, if I'm right-handed, I cut using my right hand. I go right along the edge of the template. Then I close the blade, and then, oh, it didn't quite come away. There's a little extra piece stuck there. Do you see it? I can use the scissors for that, to cut that little extra thread. And look at that. I've got another square, 2.5 inch square, to add to my 2.5 inch square collection.